Bridgewater Triangle sits within the southeastern portion of Massachusetts and includes a number of locations known for unexplained occurrences, the most prominent of which include the legendary Hockomock Swamp and the infamous Freetown State Forest. The triangle's traditional borders are revealed by connecting the dots between the town of Abington to the north, the town of Freetown to the southeast, and the town of Rehoboth to the southwest. Jeff Belanger is one of the most visible paranormal researchers today. He has written over a dozen books, including Weird Massachusetts, and has written articles for the Boston Globe. Belanger is all too familiar with the many stories surrounding the Bridgewater Triangle.
Living in Massachusetts and being into the unusual, you hear about the Bridgewater Triangle. It's one of those places that come up again and again when people find out you're into this strange stuff. It's an amazing place. It's beautiful, but it's also legendary.
Paranormal researchers and enthusiasts claim that the Bridgewater Triangle hosts an unusually high volume of strange occurrences, unexplained mysteries, and sinister activities. From ghostly hauntings and cryptic animal sightings to UFO encounters and evidence of satanic ritual sacrifice, the Bridgewater Triangle serves as one of the world's most diverse hotspots for paranormal activity. Chris Pittman has been investigating odd occurrences in southeastern Massachusetts for a number of years. With an extensive background in the study of both UFOs and archaeology, Pittman is regarded as one of the foremost authorities on all aspects of the Bridgewater Triangle.
Around 1996, I first heard about the Bridgewater Triangle and started conducting investigations there, at first focusing just on the UFO sightings. Over time, I began to realize that all the paranormal phenomena that were being reported in the Bridgewater Triangle, the Bigfoot sightings, the cattle mutilations, even the hauntings, everything, was all related and part of the same thing.
Paranormal researcher Chris Balzano has been investigating paranormal activity in the New England region for well over a decade.
When I first began investigating the paranormal, I was hoping to be strictly a Boston-based researcher because that's where I was living at the time. And yet, one of the first investigations I did was out in Rehoboth, which I had no idea was part of the context of the Bridgewater Triangle. What ended up happening was I had worked with Chris Pittman at a sub shop, and we had no idea that either of us were into this. And all of a sudden, when I discovered that he was kind of working in this area, him and I began to communicate back and forth, and I knew that this place had a name, and that it was not just the reports that I was getting, but it was part of kind of a bigger lore that was developing here in southeastern Massachusetts.
In recent years, Balzano released 2 informative books detailing accounts of paranormal activity within the Bridgewater Triangle. The publications include 2007's Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and the Paranormal in the Freetown State Forest, and 2008's Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle. A root cause for alleged paranormal activity in the Bridgewater Triangle is widely debated. Some researchers and historians cite the mistreatment of the Native American population as the possible spark for negative energy in the region. 100 years before the American Revolution, present-day southeastern Massachusetts was known as Plymouth Colony. In the summer of 1675, the local Native American population rebelled after years of oppression at the hands of English settlers. Under the initial leadership of a Wampanoag chief named Mediocre, known to the English as King Philip, the uprising quickly became known as King Philip's War. Fighting began with a native attack on the settlement of Swansea. Soon the conflict escalated and quickly spread to other communities in Plymouth Colony. Taunton, Dartmouth, Middleborough, and Rehoboth were just some of the settlements that faced the fury of native attacks. By the fall of 1675, the colonies of Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, and Rhode Island were all plunged into the depths of this devastating conflict. The brutal nature of the war was unprecedented in the region. On both sides of the conflict, innocent non-combative men, women, and children were slaughtered. Eventually, the tide of war turned in favor of colonial troops, and native resistance began to crumble. In August of 1676, King Philip himself was tracked down and killed in present-day Bristol, Rhode Island.
When King Philip was captured, he was drawn and quartered and beheaded. Much as the tradition was with the English, His head was put on a pike, and it was actually kept there in front of Fort Plymouth for 20 years.
By war's end,
We're making energy efficiency upgrades that will save energy and money for years to come.
Let's get started.
Actually, we just need to call Homeworks Energy. They do all the rest.
Stay cooler in the summer and warmer in winter with no-cost targeted air sealing and 75% or more off the cost of approved installation. Thousands of your neighbors have already called Homeworks, a Mass Save partner. Claim up to $5,800 in federal tax savings.
Call Homeworks and they take care of it all so you can save money for years to come.
Jackpocket, America's #1 lottery app, has a new way to play. Massachusetts lottery scratch-offs right on your phone. Ready, set, scratch. Real tickets, real cash prizes. Jackpocket players have already won over $500 million in lottery prizes. Now it's your turn. Use the code at checkout and get $5 off your first scratch ticket while supplies last. Download Jackpocket today.
When I started Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses, I didn't know how to turn all this fancy prettiness into a classy-looking logo. But GoDaddy Aero does, with its magical AI powers. It not only creates it, it slaps that sweet thing everywhere.
Do you love your plugins but wish you had more control of the scent? Introducing the new Febreze Plug Scent Booster. Enjoy the same 50 days of continuous scent as Febreze Plug with added features for more control, including a cord for flexible placement options, 3 intensity settings with the ability to turn it off, and a boost button for extra scent whenever you want. For long-lasting scent you can control. New Febreze Plug Scent Booster.
Vehicle breakdowns are costly.
It started making some really weird noises.
If your check engine light comes on tomorrow, the repair could easily cost thousands.
Is that transmission?
But with Endurance, you could never pay out of pocket for a costly repair again.
They covered a $14,000 engine replacement.
$1,400. Endurance paid it.
Who's going to pay for your next car repair? You or Endurance?
Call right now to get $300 off any plan. Call now.
An estimated 500 English settlers and 3,000 Native Americans had been killed. Worse yet, surviving non-Christianized natives were quickly rounded up and sold into slavery.
Unfortunately for King Philip, his child and wife had been taken away by the English. And as far as we can tell historically, both were sold into slavery.
Per capita, King Philip's War remains the bloodiest conflict in American history. 5% of New England's combined population was killed in the struggle. Today, various residents cite a Native American curse as the cause of strange occurrences in the Bridgewater Triangle region. Tim Weisberg is a journalist, author, and radio personality, perhaps best known as the host of WBSM's hit paranormal-themed radio show, Spooky South Coast. In 2010, he released Ghosts of the South Coast, a book chronicling hauntings in southeastern Massachusetts. Weisberg is keenly aware of the Bridgewater Triangle's theorized connection to King Philip's War.
A lot of people seem to think that because of King Philip's War, the Native Americans placed a curse on the Bridgewater Triangle region. I almost wonder if King Philip's War is not the cause of all of this paranormal activity, but just another byproduct of it. Maybe for some reason what happens here predated that skirmish and is something that is just inherent in the land.
At the epicenter of the Bridgewater Triangle is a 17,000-acre tract of densely wooded wetlands known as the Hockomock Swamp.
It's a massive wilderness area, and most of the most compelling and the most consistent stories come from the Hockomock Swamp area.
The swamp extends into several towns, including Bridgewater, Easton, Raynham, Taunton, West Bridgewater, and parts of Norton. The Hockomock serves as both a wildlife management area and as an important water source for the surrounding communities. In addition to its environmental importance, the swamp plays a significant role in Native American history. The word Hockomock originates from the Algonquin word meaning place where spirits dwell.
We know that there are at least 1,000 graves out there that are 8,000 plus years old. And we also know that it's been sacred to the Native Americans for at least that time. In fact, they remember a time when it was actually a glacier, which is when the swamp itself becomes the swamp. This was a place where they could hunt and fish and also be protected from other tribes.
After the outbreak of King Philip's War, the swamp was used as a hiding place for the native population. The dark and ominous wetlands served as the perfect staging ground for native raids against nearby European settlements.
If you know the swamp, you have a big tactical advantage over someone who doesn't.
Largely viewed as the beating heart of the Bridgewater Triangle, the Hockomock Swamp has seen more than its share of alleged strange occurrences.
You know, when you're talking about legends in the paranormal, it's got to be the right setting. You are probably never going to make a documentary about a haunted McDonald's. It's just the wrong setting. It could be the most haunted place on earth, but it's not the right context for people to understand and appreciate a ghostly legend. The Hockomock Swamp it's the right setting.
The best evidence that there's something very unusual happening is the consistent and constant reports from people who have been in the Hockomock Swamp and reported an eerie, unearthly feeling of being watched. It makes them very uncomfortable. It's something that can be startling even to experienced people in the wilderness, hunters, trappers, and outdoorsmen.
The Hockomock Swamp has long been the focus of cryptozoologists, or those who study the existence of cryptic animals. Ape-like bipeds, enormous birds, snakes the size of stovepipes, giant cats, and ravenous red-eyed dogs have all been reported, both within the remote swampland and in the swamps surrounding communities. Renowned cryptozoologist Loren Coleman has been researching and investigating cryptozoological mysteries since 1960. One of the world's foremost leaders in the field, Coleman has written extensively about cryptic animal encounters from all corners of the globe.
In 1975, I moved from California to Cambridge, Massachusetts. I started picking up on this whole notion that there was an area in southeast Massachusetts that almost was a magnet of weird phenomena. And because of the three Bridgewaters, there was already a hint that there was a triangle in the area. And I started looking and plotting different sightings, different incidents on a map, and really noticed it was a triangle.
In 1983, Coleman published his most famous work, Mysterious America. In a chapter detailing his findings in southeastern Massachusetts, Coleman dubbed the region the Bridgewater Triangle. In 2003, Coleman opened the International Cryptozoology Museum. The attraction houses thousands of artifacts relating to cryptic animals, including plaster casts of alleged Bigfoot prints. Located at 11 Avon Street in Portland, Maine, the museum is open to the general public. Of all the creatures said to inhabit the Hockomock Swamp region, none are more often seen or encountered than Bigfoot.
In 1970, you had a coalition of local police and state police tracking down and following what they thought was a bear. But the more and more I talked to the individuals involved, it seemed like it was a very unusual bear, a bear that sometimes would go upright, sometimes run on all fours. It was a classic Bigfoot case. There was an officer that I interviewed who told me in no uncertain terms that a Bigfoot had come to the back of his cruiser and lifted it up. He was scared to death, and those kinds of reports kept coming in.
Former West Bridgewater resident Carlston Wood has witnessed multiple strange occurrences within the boundaries of the Bridgewater Triangle. As a child living on the edge of the Hockomock Swamp, Wood will never forget the events of a winter's day in 1970.
We had gone out, a couple of the neighborhood boys and girls, and we would go across into the swamp area where it was frozen, and we would explore into the swamp as far as we could go. We had gone in maybe a mile and a half, and somebody had started to scream. One of the neighborhood boys looked up and said, "There is a huge, hairy man." We all got a glimpse of it, and we all just ran as fast and as hard as we could through the slush until we got back onto the road, only to reconvene on the school bus next Monday and ask each other if we actually saw what we saw.
In addition to the Hockomock Swamp, Bigfoot has been reportedly spotted near two small ponds in Bridgewater, known as Claybanks 1 and Claybanks 2. Bridgewater resident Joseph DeAndrade claims to have seen the elusive creature in the forest surrounding Claybanks 2.
In the winter of '78, this guy Wayne and I, we agreed to go out and check out this wooded area because this other guy, he's half Indian. He's talked to me about Sasquatch. I told Wayne, let's go over there, maybe find some footprints. When we reached the spot, we had our backs turned to the pond, and then suddenly, as we stood there together, something told me to turn around and look. And I said, I want to make it clear I don't go around hearing voices all the time. So I said to myself, I said, why? And then the voice said, turn around and you will see. So I said, well, right, so I'll turn around and look. When I turned around and looked, I saw something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. I saw what appeared to be the Sasquatch creature that I heard about. It had long dark brown hair all over its body, and I saw it from the waist up, but I didn't see the face. It was walking slowly down the hill over there. I went over to Wayne and I said, Wayne, will you please look? You got to see this, I'm not going to believe this, So I turned around again to look, and it was gone. I never saw it again.
After his alleged encounter with a giant ape, DeAndrade founded the Bridgewater Triangle Expedition Team, or BTET.
I started it in '85. It was me, Mike Foster, and then there was this other guy, Tony.
The BTET led several expeditions into the region armed with rifles and cameras, but never again saw Bigfoot. Eventually, after a series of unsuccessful expeditions and a dwindling number of active members, the BTET disbanded. DeAndrade has since founded the Paranormal Investigation Organization, also in Bridgewater, and has written extensively about his investigations. He has also been interviewed for many newspaper and magazine articles, and has been featured in local television news stories, including segments on Fox 25 and ABC 5 in Massachusetts.
Joseph DeAndrade deserves more credit than anybody for publicizing the Hockomock Swamp. For many, many years, no one was studying the Bridgewater Triangle, and he alone was chronicling the reports, getting out there, investigating sightings firsthand, going on expeditions of his own. And I think that the legends and lore that have grown up around the Hockomock Swamp and around the Bridgewater Triangle would be very different today if it wasn't for Joseph DeAndrade's work. Looking at his sighting objectively, from the distance that he was from what he saw and from what he reported, we can't say exactly what it was that he saw, and certainly it's difficult to say without a shadow of a doubt that what he saw was something unusual, something that we can't explain. Having said that, I think it's an interesting sighting, and certainly it dovetails well with a lot of the other reported activity here throughout the years.
When I saw that creature, I believe it was meant to be, because something wanted me to see it. Therefore, something eventually wanted me to investigate this triangle area.
In addition to Joseph DeAndrade, deceased West Bridgewater resident John Baker reported his own Bigfoot sighting while fur trapping in the Hockomock Swamp in the early 1980s. A Boston Herald article featured an interview with Baker concerning his encounter.
Something was following me, and I knew it was big. So I took the boat down a small creek to a dry hill, and it kept moving. I knew it wasn't a human because when it passed by me, I could smell it. It smelled like skunk, musty and dirty, like it lived in the dirt. To this day, I don't know what it was, but I know I saw it, and it was out there.
Gigantic raptors, sometimes known as thunderbirds, have reportedly been spotted in the skies above the swamp and its surrounding communities. In 1971, Norton Police Sergeant Thomas Downey claimed to have seen a large bird with a 12-foot wingspan while traveling along Winter Street in nearby Mansfield, a town just west of the Bridgewater Triangle and the Hockomock Swamp.
Officer Downey had been coming along the road and he saw this creature, 6 feet tall or so, large wings, slowly just lifted right into the air. And this was an intriguing sighting because it overlapped with a lot of reports that we were hearing about Mothman, about thunderbirds.
Ironically, Downey's sighting occurred in an area known as Bird Hill.
I was confused if the Bird Hill was named because of his sighting or that had always been called Bird Hill. certainly Officer Downey being placed in the middle of having an encounter there just reinforced for me the strangeness of the Bridgewater Triangle.
In the years following his initial report, Downey refused multiple requests for interviews concerning his encounter. Enormous snakes, uncommon to the northeastern United States, have allegedly been spotted in the area.
As I was investigating the Bridgewater Triangle, I kept hearing that during the 1930s, during the Depression, whenever the CCC was working the Hockomock swamp, that they were seeing snakes that were as large as stovepipes. These were huge snakes, and the workers would go into the woods and they would actually start running out because they would see these huge snakes. Logical phenomena, cryptid phenomena we hear all across the country, here and there, in special places like the Bridgewater Triangle.
According to cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman and local news outlets, a series of sightings involving what Coleman dubbed the Mansfield Mystery Cat occurred in towns surrounding the Hockomock Swamp region. In March of 1993, a large tan cat, resembling a mountain lion, was frequently reported in the towns of Easton and Mansfield. Presumed by some to be an escaped exotic pet, the origins of the Mansfield Mystery Cat remain unclear.
There were other reports that weren't so specific of people seeing both the yellow-colored cats and the black panthers in the area. Those interested me that sometimes people were seeing them at the same time.
In May of 1993, the headless carcass of an African serval was found near the Easton-Raynham town line. Despite the discovery, police were quick to dismiss the 30-pound spotted serval as the source of the alleged large cat sightings. Like its origin,
Away money on your car insurance?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Try Insurify. We help you compare quotes and save half on your car insurance.
Did you say half?
I did. And you can do it all online.
No.
Yeah, people save up to $1,000 a year. Same coverage, half the cost.
Look at my rates, they got cut in half. This is the best day ever.
That's my favorite part.
I like it when things are convenient and save me lots of money.
Go to Insurify.com and save up to $1,000 a year on your car insurance.
Caring for mom and working full time, it's wearing me out.
I know, but getting paid for taking care of Chet makes things a little easier.
Wait, what? You're getting paid? How do I get paid?
Call the caregiver compensation people at Entire Care. They'll pay you for what you're already doing for free.
Did you know many insurers provide support if you care for a loved one at home? Call Entire Care now for help to qualify for up to $1,500 a month or visit entirecare.com.
Entire Care? I'm calling about getting paid to take care of my mom.
We're making energy efficiency upgrades that will save energy and money for years to come.
Let's get started.
Actually, we just need to call Homeworks Energy. They do all the rest.
Stay cooler in the summer and warmer in winter with no-cost targeted air sealing and 75% or more off the cost of approved installation. Thousands of your neighbors have already called Homeworks, a Mass Save partner. Claim up to $5,800 in federal tax savings.
Call Homeworks and they take care of it all so you can save money for years to come.
The fate of the Mansfield Mystery Cat remains, perhaps appropriately, a mystery. Ravenous, bloodthirsty dogs are said to roam the woods of both the Hockomock Swamp and its surrounding communities. In 1976, Abington resident Philip Kane watched in horror when a large black and gray dog ripped open the throats of his two ponies, both of which were killed in the attack.
So here you have this thing that's as large as a pony, and he sees it standing over the ponies, ripping their throats out.
Kane reportedly fired a pistol at the dog as it fled the scene. The shot missed its mark, and the dog disappeared into the forest.
To see it walk away and disappear just kind of compounded his fear. For 3 days, there was concerted safari-like hunts in that area to try to find this giant dog, and nobody ever could.
Perhaps the most intriguing yet lesser-known report of a cryptic animal sighting in the Hockomock Swamp occurred in 1990. Former Raynham resident William Russo will never forget his amazing up-close and personal encounter.
Back in the late 1980s to about the mid-1990s, I was working a 3 to midnight shift in the town of Raynham where I lived, and that's where my strange happening occurred. When I got off work every night at midnight, I'd walk my dog Samantha. She was a Rottweiler Shepherd mix, big, around 90 pounds. Now usually we walked on the sidewalks towards the center of town. But on this particular night, we walked a different route. I don't really know why, but we did. Right behind my house is an area we called the High T's, claimed by the electric company. They run those high-tension wires. It's about 50 feet across and overgrown with 100-foot pines. So it's kind of like a route for kids who want to take shortcuts and who knows what kind of wildlife during the day, and at night, maybe stranger things. I went perhaps a half a mile when I came to an old water wheel that ran an early ironworks back a couple of 100 years ago. And there's a street light at this road, and the street light casts a big circle of light right in the middle of the street, about a 10-foot radius. So as I approached the road, all of a sudden Sammy, my dog, started to pull at the leash, and I looked down and she was quivering, she was shaking, she was rattling like an old Chevy. And then a few moments later, I heard what was scaring the dog. It was a high-pitched, almost a wail, and it went like this. It went, "I want you, I want you, here, here, I want you." Now the hairs on the back of my neck started to go up, and Sammy, of course, she was just absolutely in terror. And suddenly I saw something walk. It was erect, standing straight up. It walked into the middle of that circle of light that was cast by the street lamp. It was about 3 or 4 feet tall. It had a pot belly. And as I walked a little closer, I saw that it wasn't clothed. It had hair that was maybe 3 or 4 inches long, totally covered in hair. It had eyes that were perhaps a little big for its head, but not hugely disproportionate. The face perhaps looked like the chipmunk. At first I thought it was a child, but as I analyzed it, I thought it was in the beginning stages of old age. I don't think it was young. Whatever it wasn't young. But it was speaking, I mean, it definitely speaking, and it kept saying, "I want you, I want you," got more insistent, and it started beckoning me. "Here, here, I want you." It wasn't threatening me, but what was weird, it wasn't advancing to me. It didn't come near me. It wanted to get me in its space. This is what I felt like. I wish I could say that I was brave enough to go right up and, get that close from it, but I couldn't. I was scared. And my Samantha was scared, so we turned around and we walked home pretty fast. And I stayed up the whole night analyzing, what could this be? What could this be? And here's what I think it was saying. My best guess is, "I want you" is, "We want you. We want you. Here, here, come here, come here." I think it was speaking English. I rarely told anyone about it. I didn't know at the time the stories about the Bridgewater Triangle. I've never seen anything paranormal. I just didn't feel like sharing the story, but that was almost 20 years ago. And I'm getting up in age, and I felt I should pass it along, so I wrote a little internet blog on it, and I want to share it. I want people to know about it. I went back many times and never again saw it.
In addition to cryptic animal sightings, a number of alleged disappearances have occurred within the Hockomock swamp. One confirmed disappearance occurred in 1916 and involved Brockton resident Evelyn Packard. Packard had traveled to West Bridgewater and intended to take a canoe trip down the town river in the Hockomock swamp.
Her body was found a short distance from where we are right now. What's interesting and tragic at the same time is that finding the girl led to also discovering Solitude Rock, which is just down the road a ways, and it's got this beautiful poem etched on it, and it became the mission to find out who put the poem there, why it's there.
All ye who in future days walk by none-contested stream, love not him who hummed his lay, cheerful to the parting beam, but the beauty that he wooed in this quiet solitude.
We've got a lot of strange rocks in Massachusetts. They come up again and again here in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Within the confines of the Hockomock Swamp sits Lake Nippenicket. Known to local residents as the Nip, the lake has served as the location for many strange reports.
People have reported seeing Bigfoot creatures in the immediate vicinity of where we're standing right now. People report hearing strange calls sounding like monkeys from islands in the Nip.
These individuals came to me with the story that they'd actually seen a red-haired orangutan-like creature on the island of Lake Nippenicket. What they said happened was as their canoe was coming towards the island, they start seeing these little creatures. And they say they weren't like Bigfoot, and they weren't like chimpanzees, they were someplace in between, more like an orangutan. And they kept talking about the red fur, which is something you don't usually hear from Eastern Bigfoot reports. They seemed to be credible, they didn't really want publicity, and they didn't want me to use their name, which sometimes actually adds to the credibility of the witness.
I had a woman report to me that she was parked near here. When she saw a fire on the other side of the lake, it looked like a huge party. When she got to the place on the other side of the lake where the fire had been, there was absolutely nothing, no footprints. And then when she returned back to the place where she'd started from, she could see this mysterious phantom fire again.
As the most frequently visited location within the Hockomock Swamp, Lake Nippenicket has served as the site for numerous drownings and boating accidents. Oddly enough, the Nip's water only reaches 8 feet at its deepest point, making the number of accidents there all the more puzzling.
Lake Nippenicket, a place of a lot of history and a very key place in the Bridgewater Triangle mystery.
Surrounded by the Hockomock Swamp in Raynham, Massachusetts, sits the Raynham-Taunton Dog Track. The location is known for a high level of reported paranormal activity, including frequently reported sightings of unexplained spook lights.
So spook lights are seen moving down the old railroad tracks, glowing balls of light moving up and down. Some would say it's swamp gas. Others say it's spirit energy moving. Glowing balls of light that seem to have some intelligence to it. This is something that goes all over the world. It's not just here in the Bridgewater Triangle. The Irish might call them the will-o'-the-wisps. The Wampanoag, they had their stories of pukwudgies that would turn into glowing balls of light and lead you down a path to safety or maybe lead you off a cliff and kill you.
James Michael Rice is an author and teacher with a strong connection to the Bridgewater Triangle. In 2010, he released The Still, a collection of short stories inspired by his experiences growing up in the Elm Street section of Bridgewater.
My friends and I, we spent a great deal of time in and around the swamp. We were actually out in the woods at night on what we used to refer to as an Indian bridge on Elm Street in Bridgewater. At some point in time, one of us noticed what we thought was a canoe coming down the river, and we just sort of assumed that maybe it was a hunter with a lantern or just some people out fishing at night. And eventually these lights just entered this clearing, and there was no canoe, there were no hunters, it was just these balls of light about the size of baseballs. We didn't quite know what to make of it, so we started sort of shouting out the colors to make sure we were seeing the same thing, and we were. They were changing different colors, blues and reds and oranges. At some point in time, the lights just kind of started spinning around, skimming off the water. They seemed to be sentient, they seemed to be playing, they seemed almost as if they wanted us to see them. And then after a few minutes, they grew fainter and fainter and went back upstream from the direction they originated from. To this day, I don't have an explanation for it. I just sort of appreciate the fact that I was able to experience it.
High-profile stories involving mysterious disappearances, cryptic animal encounters, and spook light sightings in the Hockomock Swamp are well known to Bridgewater area residents. But adding to the mystique of the swamp are a number of lesser-known, one-of-a-kind reports.
I had a friend, he called me up one day and he was putting together a group that would want to go on a tour, which was a haunted tour, and that they would do a focus on the Hockomock swamp and the surrounding area. And I jumped up the opportunity because I had never been in there. The last stop was supposed to be the finale of it all. We were going down the path and I looked about 15 to 20 feet up in the air. It was a cloud shape, and it had an illumination all its own. It had a green bluish hue, and everybody else seemed oblivious to what I was looking at, and it just vanished. And that was what I found really strange about it. So the next morning, I called my best friend, who was also on the tour with me, Mary, and I said, I saw something last night. And she's like, okay, I saw something too. And I'm like, all right, well, you tell me what you saw, and then I'll let you know what, I'll tell you what I saw. And she described the same exact thing. The cloud, the bluish green hues. She had the exact story that I had.
Although the Hockomock Swamp is often the focal point of the Bridgewater Triangle, paranormal activity has been reported throughout the entire 200 square mile triangular region. Most often, it is reports of unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, that top the list of the unexplained. In 1908, a well-documented UFO sighting occurred in Bridgewater. Appropriately, two carriage-riding undertakers reported seeing the UFO on Halloween night. The object was described as an unusually bright lantern in the skies above the region.
Prior to my years as an investigator here, the 1970s in particular were a time of very high UFO activity in the Bridgewater Triangle. There were sightings along Route 44, in Raynham, in Taunton, very, very often.
The spring of 1979 proved to be the most active period of documented UFO sightings in the history of the Bridgewater Triangle region. A number of news outlets and law enforcement agencies were flooded with reports of large, low-flying UFOs. During that time, former WHDH reporters Jerry Lopes and Steve Sprazia claimed to have witnessed what is arguably the most famous UFO sighting to occur within the Bridgewater Triangle.
Jerry Lopes and I worked at WHDH Radio, and we were heading down to the Raynham dog track, and when we got off 24 onto 106, I noticed this really bright light over the tree line, and the light was coming closer and closer and getting bigger and bigger. And I remember saying to Jerry, what is that over there? So we pulled his vehicle over, and all of a sudden the stars blotted out in the shape of an arrow as this thing passed overhead.
Ironically, I'm a big baseball fan, it looked like a baseball home plate, and there were a series of lights on it.
And it was very, very wide. Perhaps the width of now, we'd say 5 747s wing to wing.
It looked like it had a little cord or something hanging off it, and sparks were coming off of it. I almost felt like I could throw a rock at the thing. It seemed that close to me.
This was pretty much the shape of it. And this thing passed overhead like this. For me, what first attracted me was this light that kind of came into our field of vision, just like that. And as this thing passed overhead, it just kept coming and coming and coming. And the light kept getting bigger and bigger.
I'm an Air Force veteran. I've been in the Air Force for 4.5 years. I've been around a number of different planes, and I said to Steve, that's not one of ours. And it just hovered there for a minute. It looked like it was over a little bit of a field, and the next thing you know, it just kind of took off.
We continued on to the dog track, and most of the conversation that evening was, what did we see? Up to that point, I had been 100% skeptic. I thought anybody who ever saw these things, they were either crazy or publicity hounds, or there was just something wrong with them in their head altogether. What I didn't realize at the time was that a lot more people had seen it than just Jerry and I.
Interestingly, over the course of the next week, there were a series of spottings, different sightings. It was reported in the papers, reported on the radio station, and at that point, Steve and I decided to come forward and say, hey, we actually saw something.
A couple of days later, an article appears in the Brockton Enterprise, And not only does it have interviews with Jerry and I, but quite a number of other folks in and around the Randolph area who had seen it, but they've got the staff artists take all of our recollections and put together a drawing, an artist rendition, which looked pretty much like this. And it's like, whoa. I keep looking up because even to this day, as I look up, I can imagine I can see the darn thing. It made that much of an impression on me.
I saw what I saw, I reported what I saw, and I've moved on.
Former Rockland resident Ron Baker also claims to have witnessed a large UFO in the skies above Southeastern. The craft shared a number of physical characteristics with the UFO reported by Jerry Lopes and Steve Sprasia.
At the time, I was working at the steakhouse on 138 in Southeastern. It was an early night, about 8:30, 9 o'clock. Pulled out to the parking lot, and I saw in the sky this big dark shadow, wedge shape or triangle shape, and it was moving very, very slow. It was about 300 feet in the air. It was about the size of I would say 2 football fields. And as it passed overhead, I could hear an engine at the back or a humming noise. I really don't know what it was.
For me, as a UFO
Extracted has changed survival shows forever.
I ain't had no food in 3 days.
Survivalists are on the hunt.
I don't like the way he's been playing this game.
And families are in the crosshairs.
We got some enemies.
Extracted, all new Monday on Fox.
We're making energy efficiency upgrades that will save energy and money for years to come.
Let's get started.
Actually, we just need to call Homeworks Energy. They do all the rest.
Stay cooler in the summer and warmer in winter with no-cost targeted air sealing and 75% or more off the cost of approved installation. Thousands of your neighbors have already called Homeworks, a Mass Save partner. Claim up to $5,800 in federal tax savings.
Call Homeworks and they take care of it all so you can save money for years to come.
The next Powerball drawing is now available on Jackpocket. Jackpocket lets you order official state lottery tickets right on your phone. Just pick your numbers and place your ticket order. See a scan of your ticket right in the app. And get your winnings instantly. Go to jackpocket.com to get the app and get your first ticket free. Jackpocket, America's #1 lottery app.
UFO investigator in the Bridgewater Triangle. It was like every time I would come here and investigate a sighting, there would be leads for other sightings. On one occasion, I was pulled over by a police officer who asked me what I was doing, and I told him honestly, I'm here to investigate UFO sightings. He immediately knew what I was talking about, and he actually guided me to a place in Berkeley near the Taunton River where UFOs had been seen recently and where I myself saw some strange lights that perhaps could have been aircraft, perhaps stars, but perhaps not.
In March of 2011, former Raynham resident Derek Holt claims to have witnessed a UFO above the skies of his former hometown. Unlike other UFO witnesses within the Bridgewater Triangle, Holt captured video footage of his sighting.
I first started seeing these orbs in the sky, would stare at them and try to really see them, and I couldn't really picture them with my own eyesight. I actually bought a small little camera and I started filming them. I caught one here at the dog track. I'd say probably directly above me. I don't know how high. It would flash blue, red, green, pulsating lights. And I captured one of them at Prospect Hill in Raynham. I was at my friend's house and I seen one of the orbs, and then it would be a bright, bright light, and then it would turn into like a plane and fly off. And then I seen that happen like 4 or 5 times in a row.
When you see the video that I recorded, you can actually see small orbs, like little softball-sized, baseball-sized orbs going back and forth, working with the ship to bring it in.
You see this shit? Holy shit.
I still to this day know I seen something that wasn't from this world.
Outside the realm of UFOs and cryptic animals, the Bridgewater Triangle also includes 4 locations that are directly related to paranormal activity and baffling mysteries associated with Native American history.
This was a place that was perhaps the most densely populated place in prehistoric, pre-colonial times. Near the larger bodies of water in the Bridgewater Triangle, virtually any flat place within 1,000 feet of a water source is likely to have been occupied by Native Americans at some time and show some evidence of Aboriginal occupation.
In 1928, Brown University psychology professor Edmund Delabar led an archaeological expedition to an area along the banks of the Taunton River in Berkeley called Grassy Island. There, the team discovered an Indian burial ground.
I started talking to archaeologists in the area. They kept talking about opening graves, finding red ochre, and then having it boil and disappear in almost mystical terms. And for an archaeologist or scientist, I found that somewhat revealing, that even they, in their discoveries, were talking in sinister terms.
When we look at reports of ochre being excavated from burials, in light of the fact that it's kind of made from a chemical formula and that it may have been buried along with other elements in the soil for thousands of years, that it might change rapidly when being exposed to the atmosphere, it might not seem as strange as it would first appear to be.
Some sources also claim that photographs of the excavation failed to develop.
The story of the burial at Grassy Island, I think, has kind of been blown out of proportion. It was more than 80 years ago now that that site was investigated, and the fact that photographs taken wouldn't have come out maybe seems a little bit less unusual than if it was something happening today with modern film equipment or cameras.
I know for myself, when I went there with the crew, the batteries of the cameras would just expire. There was almost an electrical magnetic focus in the archaeological areas that we would look into.
Many articles and publications incorrectly identify the Grassy Island burial ground as being located within the Hockomock swamp. In reality, Grassy Island's location in Berkeley is in the lower portion of the Bridgewater Triangle, 12 miles to the southwest of the Hockomock swamp. Across the river from Grassy Island in Berkeley is a small building which houses what is known as Dighton Rock.
Dighton Rock, it's got these etchings all over it. It's been lifted out of the water. It's in this pagoda museum. And you go inside and they talk about who put this rock there, who etched their names on the rock.
The four main theories are the Native American, the Phoenician, the Norse, and the Portuguese. The Portuguese theory would be the more recent one, which would say that it happened around 1511-ish, say. My own feeling about it in researching it and looking at it and comparing it to other things around New England is that I think that there's definitely a Native American aspect to it. The faces along the sides seem to correspond to some things up in Vermont. But I also feel that there is some script on there, and I feel that it's a very ancient inscription. It's much older than 1511, I believe. I think that it may indicate some contact with people that would use a Mediterranean type script, and it's not just a mishmash of abstract lines.
For me, Dighton Rock is a mystery. I don't know who put the first scratches or marks or dates on it. I think also, though, Native Americans certainly noticed this special rock that seemed to have special powers.
As an enthusiast when it comes to archaeology in the southeastern Massachusetts, I believe that those carvings were carved by Native Americans in prehistoric times. And I believe that this was a rock that marked an important place for early Native Americans hundreds or even thousands of years ago.
We hate unsolved mysteries. It drives us crazy. And Dighton Rock is just another one of those mysteries left behind by our ancestors for us to decode.
Not far from Dighton Rock, in the Assonet Village section of the Freetown Fall River State Forest, in Freetown, Massachusetts, is a glacial rock formation with an unusual feature. If one stands on the nearby observation area, they can clearly see the profile of a man protruding from the rock. It is said that this silhouette is the face of a Native American, thus making Profile Rock a sacred site to local Wampanoag Indians.
There are many other interesting archaeological or geological curiosities in the triangle. In the town of Abington, we had Lady Abington, was a profile rock, now destroyed by road building. You have a handprint rock in Middleborough and also a boulder with a face carved on it. And there are perched rocks in Lakeville and in Taunton. It seems the area has great representation of geological and/or archaeological oddities.
The fourth installment of Native American sites within the Bridgewater Triangle includes Anawan Rock, located along Route 44 in Rehoboth. 2 weeks after the death of the Wampanoag chief Mediocre, in the closing days of King Philip's War, colonial leader Captain Benjamin Church led a raiding team into the wilderness of Plymouth Colony. Their mission involved mopping up native resistors in the area. Church and his raiders tracked native fighters to the location now known as Anawan Rock. Led by Medicomet's loyal war chief Anawan, the last band of Wampanoag warriors surrendered peacefully to Benjamin Church on August 28, 1676. The surrender marked the official end to King Philip's War. Today, Native American spirits are said to haunt Anawan Rock. Greenville Paranormal founder and author Andrew Lake has been researching southern New England hauntings for a number of years. In 2011, Lake released Ghost Hunting Southern New England, a book detailing his experiences in some of the region's most haunted locations. Lake has spent much of his time studying reports of ghosts in Rehoboth and has participated in numerous investigations at Anawan Rock.
People visiting the rock have heard the sounds of people speaking Algonquin. There's also been the sound of drums beating. People have even reported phantom fires. People describe them as giving off no heat, no smell, no smoke, usually seen in back of the rock toward the swamp side. I myself have done some investigations at the rock around the anniversary of the surrender. I was with a colleague, Matthew Moniz, a few nights after the anniversary. We did witness what looked like shimmering campfire off in the swamp. There was no logical explanation for this light. Matthew Moniz and I witnessed this several times over a good 3 to 4 minute period, and then it stopped. I've also, with Matt that night, experienced what felt like an intense cold spot on a very warm August night walk in between the two of us. And I found it interesting that later I've been told by 2 witnesses who have seen the apparition of an elderly Native American man standing up on that part of the rock.
Whaling City Ghosts founder Luann Jolly has been drawn to the paranormal from a very young age. In 2012, she published Dead Whispers, a book and audio CD featuring a large collection of electronic voice phenomenon recordings obtained during her many investigations. A self-described ghost magnet, Jolly has reported a number of ghostly encounters within the boundaries of the Bridgewater Triangle.
One of the greatest paranormal experiences that I've ever had in my life occurred at Anawan Rock. We'd been investigating for probably a couple of hours, and I had my camera in my hand, and as I turned around, I met the eyes of an older man. He was misty gray, and I could see right through him. I could see the tree behind him, and it was like my eyes met his eyes, and you could see that there was a person in there, a conscious person who had feelings, and I actually do believe that it was Anawan. I suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm standing here looking at an apparition and I have a camera in my hand. So for the 1 second that I looked down to the camera, make sure it's on, and then looked up to try and grab this picture of him, he was already gone. It's an honor to meet the spirit of a man who experienced that was there those last days. And we actually feel terribly for him because he believed when he surrendered that he was leading the people to freedom. Benjamin Church had promised him that the people would be okay if they just surrendered and went to Plymouth. And we all know Benjamin Church left for a few days, came back, and by then it was too late. Anawan's head was on a pike for 20 years.
At Anawan Rock, aside from being one of the most active places, is the idea of the wampum belt. Philip gave the wampum belt, which was the physical representation of the narrative of the Wampanoag people, their history. He gave it to Anawan. And then when Benjamin Church agreed to the surrender, he took the belt, and it kind of disappears from all recorded record. And a lot of people feel that the hauntings and the weirdness that's in the Bridgewater Triangle, the weirdness at Anawan Rock, will happen until the wampum belt is returned.
You talk about Anawan Rock, and you said right at the end that things in the forest won't return right until the wampum belt is returned. Cool, the light goes on.
Oh, shit.
I'm the only one that noticed. I didn't notice that.
Oh, whoa. We hear your message. If I could, I would return it. Shit!
Those are fresh batteries.
Watch the
Those
mic.
are fresh, brand new batteries.
They gotta be loose. They gotta be a loose connector or something.
That was beautiful.
Passing by Anawan Rock, along the same stretch of Route 44 in Rehoboth, marks the location known for the red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44.
He is described as looking kind of like a farmer, wearing denims and a flannel shirt, and most descriptions of him have him with a thick head of curly red hair and a beard. Probably the most credible witnesses have described seeing his ghost along the boundary of Seekonk and Rehoboth.
I had first heard about it from New England Ghost Files, and it had all the air marks of your classic hitchhiker legend. A lot of the initial reports were firsthand from people who had experienced it. And this ghost was known to appear in cars. It was known to manipulate radios. But what has happened is, since those initial reports that were reported in that book, a lot of people have attached every urban legend associated with hitchhikers to it. So now you have, for example, if you go to the Seekonk Rehoboth line, you honk your horn 3 times, you turn off your headlights, when you turn them on, he'll be there. Or if you're driving down the road and there's 3 people, he'll appear in the 4th seat. Things that are classic urban legend.
The most important thing, especially with ghosts, is a first-hand account. A person that says, I saw the ghost. And with the red-headed hitchhiker, again and again, you talk to people and they'd say, oh man, my cousin's brother's former roommate's uncle swears he saw that guy.
Usually it's my cousin's sister saw it.
It's their brother's next door neighbor's cousin's uncle.
Or I think I might have seen it, or, you know, I don't remember what year it was.
Very rarely do you hear a story from that witness who has seen the red-headed hitchhiker.
Over time, I did talk to someone, finally, one person, who claimed he did have a first-hand account. And I talked to him on the phone and he told me he was driving to pick up a friend at the airport. It was December. It was really snowing and he had his windshield wipers going. And he saw this face of a red-headed man with a beard and all disheveled looking, like almost like as an image across the windshield, right as he's driving through that area. And it really shook him up. He didn't know what to make of it. He had heard the stories before and he drove on. When I asked him to go on the record, give his name and all that other stuff, he kind of disappeared and wouldn't return my calls after that.
Certainly it's an interesting story, and I think is kind of typical of a lot of unusual on-the-road type encounters that happen in the Bridgewater Triangle, but, you know, it's difficult to say, well, this is something that, you know, you could really investigate from a scientific perspective. You know, it's more a story or a legend, I think.
I defy you to be driving down that road in late December on a dark night, and just as you pass the Rehoboth-Seekonk line on 44, you think about it. If it doesn't cross your mind for just a second, you haven't read up on it, where you just go, whoa, what if I see him?
Amateur survivalists put their fate in their family's hands.
I don't understand this game.
Oh, we can hear him.
Do you push your loved one or push the button?
I'm not hitting the button.
Extracted. All new Mondays on Fox and watch anytime on Hulu.
In 2024, the IRS flagged nearly 2 million tax returns for possible identity fraud.
Someone stole my Social Security number and filed a tax return in my name, and I'm a CPA.
Your tax forms have all the personal information needed to commit identity theft, and you're not the only one with a copy, which makes you vulnerable. Only LifeLock alerts you to the widest volume of threats others could miss. And if your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will work to fix it, guaranteed. Enroll now.
Phantom hitchhikers and Native American spirits are not the only alleged hauntings in Rehoboth. Many additional ghost sightings have been reported within this historic community. First settled in 1636, the town stands as one of the oldest settlements in the United States. Rehoboth's long history, coupled with its former territorial reach, resulted in a higher than average number of cemeteries to be constructed within its borders.
The village cemetery has developed quite a reputation for being haunted, and very haunted. There are stories of a little boy seen dancing among the stones, and people who have seen him say he has sort of a sinister quality about him. People have reported him asking them not to leave the cemetery, to please stay and play with him. Another ghost in the older section that's seen is a woman in white hovering above the ground, moving about the stones. And there's also been a man seen in dark clothing, and people have nicknamed him Ephraim. He is seen as real as an everyday person, except for his 19th century attire. And he is seen sometimes pounding at the ground and crying and wailing. Another ghost connected with the cemetery is a vaporous form that is seen coming out of the woods when the weather doesn't allow for any kind of mist or fog, and it moves about the cemetery. Palmer River Burial Ground, located on Lake Street, was one of the earliest meeting houses of Rehoboth. People report seeing balls of light moving about the cemetery. One of the most common specters of the cemetery is a colonial soldier. He was described once as looking as if he was out of sync with his surroundings as he walked along the tombstones, running his fingers along the tops of them before he faded away. Two colleagues of mine who were not aware of each other on two separate occasions did EVP sessions in the cemetery. One investigator got what sounded like a woman dancing around her, just saying la, 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 la. And she found it very interesting because at the time she made the recording, there was absolutely no ambient sound.
It's all right for you to do that. It's all right for you to do that.
Well, the other investigator I knew was there in the middle of the afternoon, but he left his recorder going as he was leaving the cemetery and caught a woman singing, "You won't let me know your love for me." And it sounds very much like an old tavern song. So we have dubbed her the Singing Lady of Palmer River. The Shad Factory Pond, or Shad Pond Factory, got its name from the pond there that used to fill with shad. In the early 1800s, the Palmer River Manufacturing Company was set up to manufacture cotton yarn. But then unfortunately in 1884, there was a horrible fire that burned the building completely to the ground, and there was no way of saving it. And to this day, the ruins stand there by the Shad Pond. People report seeing phantom balls of light moving around the ruins. And also, like the phantom fires of Anawan Rock, people report seeing these fires dancing amongst the ruins, but yet not burning the ground, no smoke, no heat, no smell, and then they fade away. But probably the best known ghost at the Shad Factory ruins is a very melancholy looking man in black clothing that's seen walking about the ruins. Doesn't say anything to anybody, but he looks incredibly sad and disappears. Rehoboth claims to be the birthplace of public education in America. And at one point in its history, it had 13 one-room schoolhouses throughout the town. Only one of those survives, and it's on Hornbein Road near the intersection of Baker Street and Hornbein. It was built in the 1840s, and it remained a one-room schoolhouse till about 1937. And it's quite a quaint little museum, but it also has a reputation of being haunted. One of the best stories was told about a school teacher that went to the house to visit it, and it seemed to be closed up, but the shutters on the outside were open. And when she went up to the window to look in, she sees a schoolmarm and a whole full class of children. And she figured, oh, it's one of the historic recreations. And she went to the front door. The front door was locked. She knocked on it, nobody answered. And when she went back around, the class was still there. But this time the schoolmarm did notice her and stared at her very oddly, while she and all her students just faded away.
"22 miles to the northeast of Rehoboth sits the town of East Bridgewater. Much like Rehoboth, East Bridgewater contains a high volume of locations known for alleged ghostly hauntings.
We've done several investigations here in East Bridgewater. We've done the East Bridgewater Public Library, the East Bridgewater Town Hall, where there was also a lot of activity. We've also done the Carver Cotton Gin, which we've gotten 2 photographs with full-body apparitions in them.
The town also serves as the backdrop for East Bridgewater's Most Haunted, an internet-based television show hosted by paranormal researcher Ann Kerrigan and EVP specialist Mike Markowitz, who in 2009 published EVP, Electronic Voice Phenomenon, Massachusetts Ghostly Voices.
One of the more interesting investigations that I've done with my group, East Bridgewater's Most Haunted, was a house on North Central Street in East Bridgewater. It's a historical home and date back to the early 1800s, I believe, a member of the Keith family.
While we were in there, one of the investigators was upstairs, Ann Kerrigan, and she smelled roses, which is one of the things that the family said that they could smell.
That perfume hit me full in the face, like someone was standing there wearing it.
And as she was explaining this, I had microphones set up and a mixing board and everything. I had the whole house recording. This gunshot rang out.
Upstairs, I smelled roses. Yep. Like that. Now, I just peeked in whoever's room is to the right. Yeah, that's you have a big candle on the bureau? Yeah. It just went right over my voice, not heard by anybody who was in the room.
When you play that back and you play that, it's absolutely amazing, this loud gunshot. You can even hear it reverberate in the room. It's really a tremendous, tremendous recording. One of my favorites.
Upstairs, I smelled roses. Yep. Like that. Now, I just peeked in whoever's room is to the right. Yeah, that's you have a big candle on the bureau, yeah. But it's grapefruit or something.
While Rehoboth and East Bridgewater boast the largest collection of alleged ghost stories in the area, numerous reports of hauntings occur throughout the entire Bridgewater Triangle region. To the southwest of East Bridgewater, running from the Assonet village of Freetown, through the remote woodlands of the Freetown Fall River State Forest, to just beyond the southern edge of the Bridgewater Triangle in Dartmouth, lies a mostly unpaved roadway known as Coppicut Road. It is along the 7-mile stretch that many travelers claim to have had run-ins with the menacing mad trucker of Coppicut Road.
The Mad Trucker of Coppicut Road is a great legend that hovers around Freetown State Forest. When you start on Coppicut Road, it's paved. You go a little distance, it turns into a dirt road, and after that it gets almost undrivable, and I know because I was in a car that cracked its oil pan there. But the story goes, you're driving down the road at night, and this pickup truck will come out of nowhere, drive up right behind you, flashing his lights, some crazy guy at the wheel, and run you off the road. Again, this is a case where I've never found someone who has first-hand knowledge. It's just a story that people pass around, and not even that many people know about it. But the story's so good, we keep talking about it.
Although the Hockomock Swamp is likely the most famous location within the Bridgewater Triangle, the Freetown Fall River State Forest could very possibly be the most feared. Commonly referred to as simply the Freetown State Forest, the area is a 10,000-acre state preserve located within the lower right-hand portion of the Bridgewater Triangle. The forest has a long history of reported paranormal activity, including a series of ghostly hauntings and unexplained creature sightings. But unlike other locations within the Bridgewater Triangle, the Freetown State Forest has seen a disproportionate amount of criminal activity. Some paranormal researchers and enthusiasts point to a negative energy within the forest, which has served to attract a sinister human element.
I think a lot of the criminal activity that happens in Freetown is directly related to the Bridgewater Triangle, whether it is caused by the triangle or whether or not the triangle is the result of whatever predates that. It's not a surprise to me that all this crime takes place here because it's just a darker place.
Maybe the same thing that could actually be causing the paranormal activity in Freetown could also be causing all of these weird crimes to happen.
During the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, rumors of a satanic cult operating within the forest spread fear throughout the local community. Evidence of gruesome animal sacrifices substantiated the rumors and prompted local law enforcement officials to launch investigations into the strange activity. Retired Freetown Police Lieutenant Detective Alan Alves spent much of his career researching the activity of satanic cults in the region and was responsible for the investigations concerning the slaughtered animals. During his many years of investigating cult activity, Alves has seen many strange and disturbing things.
I was a young patrolman way back in the early 70s. We used to patrol the state forest, and we used to come across these people in robes and stuff, and the lieutenant used to tell me, oh, those are leftover hippies from the 60s camping out, because I used to see all kind of weird things over there. But then some hunters and people used to go around, we'd find some evidence of satanic graffiti on the rocks and animal bones, and started looking into it, and we learned that it was some ritualistic satanic activity after I discovered it. The activity started getting even worse. We saw dead animals, cruelty to animals and so forth, and stories and rumors of child molestation and and even rumors of homicides and so forth.
Eventually, a lead emerged which identified a satanic cult likely responsible for much of the ritual sacrifice in the state forest. In 1979, the nearby city of Fall River, already famous as the home of the Lizzie Borden murder trial, became engrossed in what would become one of the most sensational homicide cases in Massachusetts history. In October of that year, the remains of Doreen Levesque, a known prostitute, were found behind the stadium bleachers at Diamond Vocational High School in Fall River. Levesque's hands had been tied behind her back, and her skull had been crushed. The crime scene included evidence of sexual abuse and ritualistic overtones. 3 months later, the remains of Barbara Raposa, another known prostitute, were discovered in the woods behind a local printing plant. Like Doreen Levesque, Raposa's hands had been tied together, and her skull had been crushed. Over time, investigators learned that members of a local prostitution ring were also participating in satanic rituals.
Detective Alan Sylvia from Fall River and Paul Carey, they did most of that investigation. I was just peripheral on it, but I assisted.
In November of 1979, law enforcement officials received multiple leads from several prostitutes that a satanic cult was conducting rituals in both the Freetown State Forest and a Fall River housing project. Soon after, Carey and his partner went undercover and attended a satanic ritual in a Fall River apartment building. The ritual involved bizarre chanting and cries of "Hail Satan." Carey learned that 17-year-old pimp and prostitute Robin Murphy and 25-year-old pimp Carl Drew were leading followers in bizarre satanic rites. Eventually, Carey interviewed another local prostitute, Karen Marsden. Marsden stated that both Carl Drew and Robin Murphy had ritualistically murdered Doreen Levesque and Barbara Raposa. Weeks later, Karen Marsden failed to meet with Carey for a follow-up interview. 6 months later, her skull was found at Family Beach in nearby Westport, Massachusetts. Near the skull, police discovered a clump of the victim's hair, along with cat skulls and sheep bones. In 1980, Carl Drew and Robin Murphy were arrested in connection with the string of murders. In the case of Karen Marsden, Murphy pled guilty to second-degree murder. In exchange for a life sentence with the possibility of parole, Murphy agreed to testify against Carl Drew in his upcoming trial. In 1982, Drew was convicted in the first degree for the murder of Karen Marsden. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Condemned by mainstream satanic religious organizations like the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set, ritual sacrifice and criminal deeds in the name of Satan remain controversial subjects. Nevertheless, self-stylized Satanists ritualistically sacrificing animals and committing crimes in the name of the Dark Lord continued in the Freetown State Forest long after the arrests and convictions of Robin Murphy and Carl Drew. In some cases, it was difficult to determine whether hardline Satanists or curious, impressionable teenage youth carried out the subsequent activities. In the late 1980s, a series of grave robberies occurred involving small cemeteries in remote sections of the Freetown State Forest.
They were dug up, skulls removed, remains removed, or at least 4 or 5 that I know of that we found afterwards.
New England Paranormal Research founder and author John Brightman has been investigating strange occurrences in the Bridgewater Triangle for over a decade. Recently, Brightman published Dark Gift, a fictional novel based on his numerous investigations in the Freetown State Forest. Growing up in Freetown, Brightman is well acquainted with the many stories surrounding the State Forest region.
We're at the Freetown Cemetery right off of South Main Street here in Assonet, where this mausoleum behind me was broken into, and juveniles actually stole the head out of here.
They broke into the mausoleum and broke into the crypt. They removed the body from the crypt, body of a female, and they cut the head off. They removed it and put it in the car, but as they were driving away, the smell was so bad that they ended up hiding it in the bushes. We ended up arresting 3 juveniles that were involved in that break-in, and they told them they were using it to get into a satanic cult.
When they were caught, the story that one of them told was that they believed that they could gain power by drinking from the skull. The other 2 kind of were involved in a periphery way. One of them said he was just along for the ride. The other one said that he believed in the occult and he thought that this would be kind of a cool thing to do. All of them have since said that there's no way they were involved in the occult at all and it was just kind of a kid's prank. But this is the kind of thing that happens in the state forest.
Obviously, it brought a lot of attention and people were coming here to check it and see what was going on. They decided to take off the metal gate door and actually brick it in so nobody could break into it ever again. We're here in the Freetown State Forest up at the Faxon Animal Rescue League Pet Cemetery. People that had put down their pets at Faxon would bring them up here to give them a proper burial. In the 80s, this was shut down because people that were part of cults or trying to get into cults were coming up here, digging up the animals' remains in turn to be able to use that during the rituals.
Many locations in and around the Freetown State Forest have long been associated with alleged satanic activity. Two sites in particular have captured the imaginations of local residents. Swirling with rumors of child rape, animal sacrifice, and even ritualistic murder were a hidden underground bunker and a remote makeshift hut.
A hunter who was walking through the woods discovered an underground bunker. And what this was basically built into a hill. There was an underground lair. It was then covered with a blue tarp and then of course all the stuff that you would naturally find in the forest. So unless you approached it from the right angle, you wouldn't be able to tell that there was anything there at all.
If you went to the one side, it was dropped down and you could go inside. And it had some disturbing things in it. You know, some dolls with heads cut off and then a little tiny, tiny chair that a 2-year-old would sit in and looked like they chopped it out of a tree. Had some bindings there and so forth.
It was very clear that whatever was working there was kind of connecting some kind of child abuse and perhaps child abduction with some kind of occult twist to it.
There wasn't anything of any evidentiary material there where we could trace back to any individual or group. Persons of interest told me about this hut that supposedly was in the woods that was used by the people involved in the Fall River cult. Witnesses indicated that's where some of the rituals took place. We were led down there. It was at least a 2.5-mile walk into the woods. And there we found the hut, and we found all the trappings of satanic worship, the upside-down pentagram, dolls nailed to the trees, and so forth. Apparently it could have been used in the winter because it was made with very insulated material. And it was about the size of a prison cell.
For over 2 decades, the exact locations of these satanic dens remained the subject of debate. However, in the fall of 2012, the producers of this documentary were successful in rediscovering the locations in question. Following a lead from Freetown resident Mike Fournier, the filmmakers were led to the collapsed remains of the notorious underground bunker.
I was walking out in the woods with my father. We came across this little hole in the ground. I remember walking in and seeing a big pentagram on the floor, and then 2 cots with a big fire pit right in the middle. It doesn't really look the same anymore, but this is definitely the spot.
Hidden away off on an old logging trail in the Freetown portion of the state forest, pieces of the barely recognizable bunker are still covered with faint traces of satanic graffiti. Shortly after finding the underground bunker, the filmmakers confirmed an approximate whereabouts of the infamous makeshift hut, commonly referred to as Carl Drew's Shack. Based on information in a 1988 Standard Times article and leads from Alan Alves and a local Cranberry Bog employee, the collapsed remains of the hut were found in a remote section of dense woodlands just outside of the Freetown State Forest. For years, paranormal researchers, ghost tour patrons, and curious investigators have found numerous abandoned hunting cabins, ranger stations, and ice shacks, all of which were mistaken as either the underground bunker or makeshift hut. The 2012 expeditions to the areas in question helped to resolve any confusion regarding the definitive locations of these 2 renowned forest hideaways. And although both the bunker and hut are commonly associated with Carl Drew and the Fall River cult, a definitive link to the suspects in question has never been fully established. Also important to note is that no confirmed human victims of satanic ritualistic sacrifice have ever been discovered within either the boundaries of the Freetown State Forest or within the traditional borders of the entire 200 square mile Bridgewater Triangle.
Myself and a state police canine unit wanted to just bring the dogs in and go around and see if we could find the remains of any bodies buried and so forth in the state forest. So we set up a couple of days to do that with the dogs, and then at the last minute, powers that be canceled the operation.
The majority of the cults that find their way here to the Freetown State Forest, whether they be labeled satanic or whether they be labeled something else, are not criminal in any way. It just seems to be that the more organized that cult becomes, the more likely that they are involved in kind of deeper, darker crimes.
Despite a lack of evidence for crimes involving human sacrifice in the Freetown State Forest, evidence of animal sacrifice was routinely discovered throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s.
What began in the forest as pigeons and small animals quickly moved up to larger animals until finally there were cow carcasses being found here.
In 1999, a dozen baby calves were slaughtered in a satanic ritual near the Dartmouth side of the forest.
A huge amount of calves left in the middle of the state forest with the absence of blood. And they used that blood in their sacrifices.
What that really signaled to people like Alan Alves and other law enforcement was that things were getting more serious, and that perhaps more organized, darker elements were finding their way into the forest.
The cattle mutilations of the late 1990s marked the last known instance of satanic ritual sacrifice in the Freetown State Forest. Although satanic-related crimes and activity often dominate headlines relating to the Freetown State Forest, the area has also been associated with a number of isolated crimes, odd occurrences, and paranormal activity. In 1978, the remains of 15-year-old Raynham resident Mary Lou Arruda were found tied to a tree in the forest.
Mary Lou Arruda was on her bicycle on a dirt road in Raynham, and she was knocked off her bike and kidnapped, brought to the state forest in Freetown, and subsequently murdered. Her body was found 2 months later in November of '78 by two dirt bike riders. They said, we found a headless body tied to a tree. It was like a week after Halloween, so I figured it must be a dummy. And they brought me to the area. They wouldn't go near it. They pointed up there, and I walked up the hill, and sure enough, it was a headless body of a female tied to the tree.
Eventually, 32-year-old James Cater was tried and convicted of the kidnapping and murder. The death of Mary Lou Arruda is often confused with crimes committed by the Fall River satanic cult.
Although the James Cater case, Mary Lou Arruda case had absolutely nothing to do with a satanic crime, unfortunately her body was found near some of that activity.
His defense attorney basically put forth the theory that a cult had killed Arruda and not him. This kind of led to an attaching that he was perhaps involved with a cult, and that's what happened.
I had to testify in that case and say, in my opinion, had nothing to do with that. He appealed it several times, got 3 or 4 trials, but he's still doing life in prison for that crime.
In 1987, a drifter, falsely accused of being a police informant, was murdered in the forest. In 2001, 2 men were found shot to death in a car on Bell Rock Road in the same region. In 2006, multiple strange incidents involving animals occurred in the forest, including the discovery of numerous abandoned dogs in various stages of aggression and the reported sightings of an escaped wandering emu. As the site of a Wampanoag Indian reservation, and like many other locations within the Bridgewater Triangle, the Freetown State Forest boasts a long history of reported paranormal activity related to Native American legends. Elusive pukwudgies are said to roam the woods of the state forest. Pukwudgies are 3-foot-tall beings associated with Wampanoag folklore.
Pukwudgies were mischievous and caused the Wampanoags trouble, and everything that went wrong, it was because of the Pukwudgies. It predates the colonialization of the country. It predates even the kind of organizing of the Wampanoag tribe. And then somewhere in the Wampanoags' history, they take this very weird twist where they go from being troublemakers to being labeled as evil. And then eventually, when they begin Christianizing the Wampanoags, being talked of as the foot soldiers of the devil.
Humanistic in their features, Pukwudgies possess enlarged noses, fingers and ears, and smooth gray skin. Pukwudgies are also said to have magical powers, including the ability to disappear and the ability to glow in the dark.
They control these bursts of light, which are called taipaiwunkas, which today we probably would refer to as orbs. But then they also seem to be controlled by this darker force, this almost shadow-like creature who seems to have control over them, or at least to be observing what they're doing. So I can always tell a Pukwudgie experience from something else because it has those different elements. They're never in isolation with each other.
Pukwudgie sightings in the Freetown State Forest share striking similarities with William Russo's unexplained creature encounter. Christopher Balzano's book Dark Woods features an eyewitness account from a woman named Joan who encountered an alleged Pukwudgie while walking her dog in the Freetown State Forest. Although William Russo's creature encounter took place 20 miles to the north of the Freetown State Forest in the Hockomock swamp, some paranormal researchers are now wondering if Russo may have encountered a Pukwudgie. In May of 2008, a bizarre incident was caught on camera while filming a segment for Chris Balzano's book and DVD, Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting. The following clip features a woman named Maureen struggling with what some investigators claim was possession at the hands of a Pukwudgie.
Maureen! Push him up.
Ron, you're still connected here. Ron, watch her going back too far.
Here. Maureen?
Come on, Maureen, fight him.
Oh, come on, Maureen. Oh, crap.
Don't let her go back too far, Ron.
Don't let her get near the water.
Yeah.
No, Maureen. Maureen. Maureen.
Go holy water.
Maureen. Leave this boy. I need you to leave this boy. It's not your own. Come here. Leave it. Leave the Father and the Son, the Holy Spirit. Leave this boy. Leave it. Leave it. What's wrong?
According to camera operator Andrew Lake, a strange light was later seen in the distance as Maureen recovered from the alleged attack. The ledge is arguably the most famous location within the Freetown State Forest. Outside the realm of Pukwudgie-related incidents, the site has been associated with a high volume of paranormal activity.
I was walking out onto the ledge and I saw this woman in white standing out on the promenade. And I turned around to the people I was with to say, hey, we're not alone. Turned around and she was gone. And at that first instant, I figured, oh crap, she jumped. So I went running over to the edge to look down to find nobody. And the two town residents that have lived here all their lives are like, oh, you saw the lady of the ledge. And they proceeded to tell me this folklore about a woman who had committed suicide because her lover was supposed to meet her here.
It's one of those things where it makes for a really good backstory. We don't know whether the backstory is true, and it probably isn't, but it doesn't discount the fact that she's seen here.
Paranormal researchers routinely debate the validity of the Bridgewater Triangle's traditional borders.
The original boundaries, as described by Loren Coleman, made for a nice, tidy triangle based on his research. But in the years since, the more people have talked about the Bridgewater Triangle and the more that they've shared stories and experiences, we've seen that the triangle has to expand.
To me, the geographic boundaries of it are kind of a framework for looking at it and trying to identify areas within the triangle where anomalous phenomena are commonly reported. And certainly there are areas that are immediately adjacent to the boundaries of the Bridgewater Triangle that have a very high level of activity with a lot of sightings. But there are also areas within the established boundaries of the triangle where there's a very low level of activity.
It's not a completely straight line that defines this region. It spreads. And when you talk about legendary areas, it's always going to spread. You know, a legend may start in one little tiny parcel of land, but the sightings, the region is going to grow over time. That's just a natural process of legends. People have experiences elsewhere, and it ties back to the original source.
Now it's to the point where I almost wonder if there even is a triangle anymore, that it's just an ever-reaching tentacle that as each year passes and more activity takes place and more people are paying attention to it, those tentacles just start to reach out further and further. Who knows, you know, the Bridgewater Triangle could eventually encompass the entire world.
How the reported strange events within the Bridgewater Triangle all tied together remains another widely debated topic.
When I was first investigating the sightings here, it seemed to me like there would be so many Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings and ghosts and monsters and creatures and aliens. It had to be that the Bridgewater Triangle was some kind of a vortex or a portal. But you know, over the years, I've kind of taken a different view of it, and now I think maybe it's just that in our 21st century lives, we're kind of divorced from the natural world around us in a lot of ways, and going into the Freetown State Forest and going into the wilderness of the Hockomock swamp, that something inside us responds to that, maybe in a way that harkens back to our Stone Age ancestors. And maybe that's what ties it all together.
Years ago, my brother and I, we went and stayed in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. And the shamans there believe that the jungle itself has a spirit, has a soul. And I think that the Hockomock is one of those places. I feel as though the Hockomock has its own soul. It's a very old soul, and it has a memory. And some of the things that it's experienced, such as King Philip's War, I feel as though it holds those memories. And every now and then, when someone goes out into the swamp, they experience something through the swamp.
I think that we've got something very unique going on in the Bridgewater Hockomock area that we should at least acknowledge and keep our eyes and ears open to the new stories that keep presenting themselves even when we don't want them necessarily.
When you're looking at the Bridgewater Triangle, nothing can be isolated. All of these things are interconnected, and that's really the initial force that drove Coleman. So for us to ever fully understand what's going on in the Bridgewater Triangle, we have to look at it through a cryptozoological lens. We have to look at it through a ufology lens. We have to look at it through a ghostly lens, because only when we kind of evaluated the area through all of those different perspectives and combine our evidence and combine what we found and be open to the fact that those things might kind of all be playing on the same thing, that we're ever going to really understand what's going on in the triangle.
You can't look at the Bridgewater Triangle as just an area where there's paranormal activity. You have to look at the underlying layers of all the history, all of the geological factors, and the more people who are studying it, the more we're actually going to be documenting. So is it just a case of we're documenting more here because it's been brought into the limelight, or is it a case where there really is just more of activity here for us to document?
The Bridgewater Triangle is definitely one of the most popular topics on our show. We can see the download numbers that spike when we talk about the Bridgewater Triangle. We can see the website hits that spike when we have triangle-related guests. It's amazing that for something that 10 years ago people might not have ever heard of, it's now becoming one of the preeminent paranormal stories in the world.
I really modestly and humbly came up with this name, and I'm just as surprised 30 years later that it's such a worldwide phenomenon.
The Bridgewater Triangle, being an area filled with paranormal activity, obviously makes it very special, in my opinion. I know the Bermuda Triangle, everybody seems to know about that, so it would be nice if we could spread the word about the Bridgewater Triangle.
After all the investigations we've done here within the triangle and the photographs we've caught, as well as the disembodied voices on our EVP recorders, I do believe in the Bridgewater Triangle.
The Bridgewater Triangle is definitely a haunted location. Every time I record, there's always something that gets picked up without question.
The Bridgewater Triangle is real. There's no question in my mind. The weirdest things happen here, the most unexplained things happen here, and you can feel it in that state forest. I dare anybody to go there in that middle of state forest at midnight or in the dark and tell me if you don't sense something that you don't sense anywhere else. I can't be in the state forest at night. Even with a gun, I was uncomfortable in the state forest.
Whatever it is, we keep talking about this region for some reason, and the reason is something real happened here. There's no other way. You take away the real events, and it's just a story. Stories go away.
I don't believe in the Bridgewater Triangle. I accept it.
Like a cross between a man and an alien with wings and red eyes. It scared me more than anything that I have ever seen in my life.
It was big, too big to be a person. It stood at least 9 foot tall. I mean, it was massive.
You know, if you see something floating atop the ground, wouldn't you like run for your life?
You gotta get the gun.
I know there's something out there. I know it's a beast. Neither one of us were sure if we were gonna make it out alive.
The Appalachians, some of the oldest mountains on Earth.